All right, great. Well, welcome. It's my honor and pleasure to be here with you today and to be facilitating a conversation with Kiran. Um, I want to hear what she has to say, so I'm going to start by asking a three-part question, which enables you to talk 3 times longer than if I asked 3 questions. And I want to start with, what do you see as the likely most important social benefits of biotech going forward, number one? Number two, how can AI either magnify those benefits or make benefits possible that might not have otherwise been? And then lastly, what can or should government do to make all of this more likely? In other words, say whatever you want about AI and biotech.
Well, I better remember your questions, but thanks a lot. It's great being at GTS. So let me start with your first question about what does biotech do to society as a whole? And I would say that right now we're at the cusp of some very, very exciting new technologies emerging in biotech. Starting with, of course, gene editing technologies, which is CRISPR-based. We also have this emerging field of synthetic biology. And I think the sector that I started my company with, enzyme technologies, are beginning to get to play a very, very key role in sustainability and new technologies. So if I were to look at each of these technologies, I think the social impact is tremendous, because through gene editing, synthetic biology, and enzyme technologies, we are actually in a position to come up with new ways of developing drugs, new ways of developing biomaterials, new materials. We have new ways of developing smart foods, smart proteins, and so on and so forth. So I think what we are really at the cusp of is to see all this happening in the foreseeable future. Now, this is very exciting because it has a huge impact on the way we look at land use, the way we look at new forms of energy, the way we look at sustainability in general, and the way we develop new drugs for unmet medical needs. So I think, and of course, agri-tech as a whole, how do we develop new foods, new crops, and et cetera, et cetera. So I just think, George, it's a very exciting time for biotech. But what makes all of this possible is information technology and data science. Without data science, without generative AI, without all the new kind of technologies that are emerging in software and data science, I don't think any of this would be possible. And to me, I think this is where we need to spend a bit of time to see how do we want to use this technology convergence in delivering on all these promises. I think the biggest challenge we have in the biotech sector is because a large number of these so-called drugs and foods and other materials are consumed by human beings. The biggest regulatory challenge is about safety and efficacy. And we have another added challenge, is that in the past, regulatory processes were so long and gestational in terms of taking the lab, the idea from lab to market, that the inherent risk that lies in taking these ideas to the market is both expensive and gestational, which kind of deters investment. So when you look at the IT sector and the regulations around IT sector, you can take an idea to the market in a very short period of time. And that's why investors are very excited, because they're willing to back new ideas, because either it works or it doesn't work, but you know that very fast. In our sector, it takes years, sometimes even 10 years to take an idea to the market. And at the end of 10 years, the probability of failure is also very high. And that makes it very difficult for investors to back these new ideas in biotech. I think technology can compress these timelines. I think you can make, predictive kind of and prognostic kind of algorithms work in this sector. And I, for one, believe that technology has a very, very important role to play in the future of biotechnology and the way we develop products. I would love to see an idea, you know, being able to go from lab to market in less than a year. Now, how do we do that? The way we do that is to really look at, completely reforming our regulatory process. Regulations today depend a lot on iterative processes, trial and error, and of course, human subjectivity in interpretation of that data. Just think about how you can actually turn it on its head if you use technology. The iterative process can be made much more predictable by just using generative AI, data analytics to really, really come up with algorithms that allow you a greater probability of success, a greater predictability in how you're going to deliver on these products. Because safety and efficacy data points can be established through these kind of methodologies. I would love to develop a drug in a year because there are huge unmet needs in every disease segment. And if you can do it in a short cohort of patients who, quote unquote, are not being used as guinea pigs, but you know what you're doing with that drug and you know how it's going to work in the human body. And if you can validate all that you think is happening and take that product to the market, very rapidly, I think there'll be huge investment, huge numbers of, I think the whole startup ecosystem can flourish today. And you will have an ideas economy even in biotech, which is really sparse when you compare it to IT. So I would like to see the use of technology in a much bigger way. And I must admit, biotech and the pharma sector in general are very late adopters of technology. And I think a lot of it has to do with regulations that surround this sector. Because regulators have been very slow adopters of technology in leveraging technology to, accelerate regulation or regulatory approvals. And to that point, George, I think we need to really, really ensure, you just heard in the previous panel discussions, I think tech-savvy regulators are very, very crucial to what we're trying to do. If you do not have technically skilled and technology-aware regulatory reviewers, I don't think we can really deliver on this promise of accelerated approvals or the kind of exciting opportunities we have to develop, smart food, smart drugs, smart diagnostics. Genomics has such an important role to play in personalized medicine. So personalized and precision medicine is something that is going to highly rely on, technology. And last but not least, I think regulations will also have to look at biohazards. Because in all this, we have to make sure that we don't start developing, uh, you know, either products or organisms that are unintended in terms of their consequences. So, for instance, that the COVID-19 pandemic, there's always been this suspicion that was it a leak from a lab? We need to make sure that there is very strong cooperation across the world in terms of surveillance when you're getting into these new and exciting areas. So whilst we are trying to develop a smart food or a smart protein, let's make sure that we do it right. And that's where the regulations are very important. And that's where surveillance becomes very important. So I'll just end my comments there because you asked me so many questions, and I did take a long time answering them.
It's great. Let me pull on a couple of threads, Kiran. One is the availability and accessibility of the data that you would need to use information technology in the various ways that you talk about. Does that exist, and in what ecosystems? In other words, does it exist kind of globally or nationally? Where are the data that your company or a researcher at an IIT would need to have?
You're right. That's a very important question because at the moment it does sort of exist in silos. But I think this whole concept of data lakes is possible. For instance, all clinical trials that are conducted by various companies do exist on clinical trial protocols. And that's something which you should be able to access and create a data lake from. Okay? Normalizing data is another big challenge in our sector. Hospital data exists in silos. How do you bring that all together? So there has to be a real thinking around how you're going to use hospital-based data. Today, when I look at, insurance companies, they have a lot of data residing with them. How are you going to access that data? So when you're looking at, where do you start? I would say that, drug regulations can start with clinical trial registries which are accessible and available for technology leveraging. But when it comes to other kinds of technologies, I think you will need to start seeing how you can share data. Of course, there's this whole concept of anonymizing data, which is what every hospital has to do when they share data. But I think where there's a will, there is a way. And I think we have to get policymakers and regulators to think about the power of technology in just regulating these areas, which is just surging and accelerating at a speed which regulators are not comfortable with.
Well, let me pull on that a little more because those two things are related. You talked about how the data are siloed, and that's true. I know it's true in the United States, and you're saying it's true here. And you need more informed regulators. Where in the system would be the people who would conclude that you need to break down those information silos and do something about that, and then know enough to begin to figure out how to do that? How would you, if you were put in charge, if they called you now and said, Kiran, you've made enough money, your company's really successful, come figure out how to accomplish this, how would you think about starting that? Who would be involved?
So, this morning there was a very interesting session where Rahul Mathan, and Tino and Nandan had a very interesting discussion on how do you embed technology, which sort of runs parallelly between regulation and innovation. And I think that's the way we have to look at it. If you don't have that mindset within regulators that they have to change, that they have to use technology, you will never be able to do anything. But if you embed technology in everything you do, because this is the era of technology. This is the era of converging technologies. So you've got to get policymakers to embed technology-led thinking in the way they script policies in the future. You've got to embed technology in regulatory agencies. If you don't do that, you will never be able to change anything. So when you talk about reforms, it's really about technology-led reforms. We all talk about reforms in policy making, in regulatory systems. It's all about technology-led reforms, technology-led policies. That's what I think is happening today. And I think India being of the size and scale it is at, and the fact that we've started looking at a digital, public infrastructure, which is as a starting point, I think we also need to look at, a digital regulatory infrastructure.
Excuse me, I'm fighting a cold. When you think of personnel, to do that, the people that you might want to do that probably are interested in doing the research or going into the business do so. How does government attract those people?
I think, when you want to find such people, I think people are up to this exciting challenge. You can find people. I think in India, we found a large number of people in this whole data science area. And I'm sure many of them would be very excited to be part of scripting new policies, new regulations. I don't think there's a dearth of people, but you've got to make it exciting. It's not a kind of a mundane job because you're trying to change the world. You're trying to change way things are done. So I don't think there's going to be a dearth, and you need to also work with companies that can help you do it. So it's not about, again, working in a silo. I think government also needs to network, needs to interact with people who can help them do this. And I think it's a very exciting opportunity to work with tech companies. I mean, I'll give you an example. I was recently in the US, and I visited a very interesting uh, data-led company that was doing very exciting things with the Mayo Clinic. And what they told me was that they had a 400 strong data science, data analytics team in Bangalore. And they had about 100 strong data-led team or data thinking team in Boston. Now, I think this corridor is becoming a very interesting corridor in biotech. And we're seeing a large number of these models. So by working with companies like this, and I'm sure many of these companies will come up, government can actually benefit a lot, just like Mayo Clinic is benefiting a lot in terms of its more predictable prognostic algorithms with which it can manage patients better and have better outcomes. So I think these are very, very important, inflection points in our journey of technology-led policy making and technology-led regulations that we cannot afford to lose more time.
And do you see this as an area that ISET could work on bilaterally, U.S. and India? And if so, kind of how would you frame it or describe where they should start in the discussion about this?
So I think, today we are having a large number of discussions on access and affordability of drugs. The US is no exception. In fact, it is at the center stage of that discussion and debate. And I think the usual refrain that you get from industry is it's too expensive to develop drugs. It costs billions of dollars and a very high rate of failure. If you can reduce that rate of failure to being insignificant, and if you can, accelerate the time to market to a fraction of what it is today, it addresses that cost of access, that question of access and affordability. So I think drug regulations is a great place to start because everyone benefits from that. Patients benefit, health systems benefit, and the investment and spends on healthcare systems across economies is very high and it's only rising. So how about starting there?
That's great. And would you frame that also in a sense of applying AI to biotech as part of the discussion too?
It starts with that. I mean, any new technology has to have convergent technologies driving the future. And I, for one, believe that you need more predictability, you need more transparency, and you need, higher probability of success. Now, in that, as you know, George, very often, when it comes to any regulatory agency, they are very reluctant to embrace new technologies. They would rather play it safe and say no to any new product, right? That's their first reaction, because they are answerable to society, they're answerable to government if anything goes wrong. I think technology provides them with an indemnity. Okay, that's the way to look at it. And I think that's why they need to embrace technologies to look at the future in the way things are done, the way regulations are implemented, and how new regulatory reforms can hugely benefit from technology and how society then benefits as a whole. I mean, imagine denying a new drug to a patient because the regulatory system is so slow, or denying a very important nutritional solution to a country that needs a particular type of food and nutrition challenge that it's addressing. And then you have to wait because the regulatory process is so long. Or, saving the planet with new materials that don't necessarily use land or the sea to do things. I think they are very exciting
And we
opportunities.
talked about, just to close, I mean, how the, the, the use of, very statistically backed or data backed algorithms to do this can help protect the regulators from irresponsible politicians who might intimidate them from doing this. So in a way, it
Yes.
becomes a synergistic process that you're talking about.
Absolutely. I just think today, I think regulators are very fearful of regulatory approvals in areas that are not very deeply understood. I think they would rather not take the risk of taking a positive decision because it might backfire, is what they think. And as you said, they could be asked very uncomfortable questions in Parliament or in the Congress. And I think technology can actually provide them that indemnity and that courage with which, and really more data-led decision making that allows them to take the right decision at the right time so that the benefit to society is faster.
That's great. We're out of time. There's a big red sign there that says that. But I want to thank Kiran. That was really interesting. And thank you, as always, for helping in GTS and making it a richer experience for everybody. Thank you all for coming, and look forward to the next session.